When my manager handed me that envelope marked Confidential Executive Directive and told me to destroy the original shipping manifests, I had no idea that refusing would cost me my job within 48 hours. What I also didn't know was that 3 weeks later, federal agents would be dragging him out in handcuffs, while my former colleagues watched through the office windows in stunned silence. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning started like any other Tuesday at Meridian Logistics, our sprawling warehouse facility in Richmond, Virginia. I'd been their operations compliance manager for 4 years, overseeing cargo documentation and regulatory adherence for one of the East Coast's largest freight distribution centers. The coffee was still steaming in my mug when Derek Holloway, our regional director, appeared at my cubicle doorway with that envelope and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Sarah, I need you to handle something sensitive," he said, glancing around to make sure we weren't overheard. "Corporate's requesting some adjustments to our Q3 shipping records. Nothing major, just some classification corrections." I opened the envelope. Inside were photocopies of dozens of shipping manifests, each one marked with red pen corrections. What I saw made my stomach drop. These weren't minor classification adjustments. Someone had systematically altered weight declarations, changed country of origin stamps, and modified hazardous material designations across hundreds of shipments. "Derek, these aren't corrections," I said, keeping my voice steady. "These are falsifications. Look at this one. Someone changed a 2,800-pound steel shipment to 1,200 pounds. And this manifest shows electronics from China relabeled as originating from Mexico." His expression hardened. "Sarah, you're overthinking this. These are just administrative updates to align with our new corporate standards. I need you to implement these changes in our system and dispose of the original documents." I stared at the papers in my hands, my mind racing through the implications. Falsifying shipping weights could indicate customs fraud. Changing country of origin labels violated international trade agreements. Misrepresenting hazardous materials put dock workers and transport crews at risk. This wasn't administrative housekeeping. This was systematic criminal activity. "I can't do this," I said firmly. "These alterations violate federal shipping regulations, customs law, and workplace safety standards. If I implement these changes, I'd be complicit in multiple felonies." Derek's jaw tightened. "Sarah, you're making this more complicated than it needs to be. Sometimes business requires flexibility. The company needs team players who understand that rigid adherence to every little rule can hurt our competitive position." "Every little rule?" I stood up, the envelope still in my hands. "Derek, these aren't suggestions. They're federal laws designed to prevent smuggling, tax evasion, and workplace accidents. I won't falsify government documents, period." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Let me be clear, Sarah. This directive comes from the very top. Corporate has already approved these adjustments. Your job is to implement them, not question them. Are we going to have a problem here?" The office around us continued its normal rhythm. Keyboards clicking, phones ringing, colleagues discussing delivery schedules. But I felt like I was standing in a bubble of sudden, dangerous silence. Everything I'd worked for, everything I'd built at Meridian, hung in the balance of this moment. "If implementing these changes is a requirement of my position," I said carefully, "then yes, we're going to have a problem." Derek straightened, his face flushing red. "Fine. Consider this your final warning, Sarah. You have until end of business today to complete these updates. If they're not done, don't bother coming in tomorrow." He turned and walked away, leaving me standing there with evidence of what appeared to be a massive freight fraud operation. I looked around the office, wondering, who else knew? Who else had been asked to participate? Who else had maybe said yes where I'd said no? I spent my lunch break in my car, engine running, air conditioning fighting the Virginia heat, while I stared at those manifests. I'd copied everything before Derek could retrieve the originals, and the more I studied the patterns, the more horrifying the scope became. This wasn't a few isolated incidents. This was systematic, organized, and had clearly been going on for months. The weight discrepancies alone represented millions of dollars in unpaid shipping fees and customs duties. The country of origin changes suggested possible sanctions violations, routing goods through prohibited supply chains. Most disturbing were the hazardous material modifications. Shipments of industrial chemicals and batteries reclassified as general merchandise, bypassing safety protocols designed to protect everyone who handled them. I thought about my colleagues, dock workers who trusted that hazmat labels were accurate, drivers who loaded their trucks based on declared weights, customs officials who processed declarations in good faith. How many people were unknowingly at risk because someone at corporate had decided that regulatory compliance was negotiable? When I returned from lunch, there was a meeting request in my inbox. Sarah Chen, Performance Review, 4 p.m. Conference Room B. The sender was Janet Martinez from Human Resources. My heart sank. They weren't even waiting until end of business. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I knocked on the conference room door at exactly 4 o'clock. Janet was there with Derek and someone I didn't recognize, a stern-faced woman in a navy suit who introduced herself as Patricia Wells, corporate counsel. Sarah, please sit down, Janet began. We've received concerning reports about your attitude toward company directives and your unwillingness to support team initiatives. I remained standing. Are you referring to my refusal to falsify federal shipping documents? Patricia Wells leaned forward. Ms. Chen, I think there's been a misunderstanding about the nature of the administrative updates you were asked to implement. These were legitimate business adjustments, not the violations you've characterized them as. I have the original manifests, I said. I can see exactly what was changed and how. These aren't administrative updates. They're systematic falsifications of government documentation. Derek slammed his hand on the table. Enough. Sarah, your inability to function as part of this team has created an untenable situation. Your position requires flexibility and trust in corporate decision-making. Since you've demonstrated you lack both qualities, we're terminating your employment effective immediately. Janet slid a folder across the table. Your final paycheck, including accrued vacation time, and a severance agreement. Sign the non-disclosure clause on page 3, and we can avoid any complications. I opened the folder and read the severance terms. 2 weeks' pay in exchange for my agreement to never discuss proprietary business practices or internal company operations with any outside party. They were paying me to stay quiet about their fraud. I won't sign this, I said, closing the folder. And I won't stay quiet about what I've seen. Patricia Wells' voice turned cold. Miss Chen, I'd strongly advise you to reconsider. Making unfounded accusations against former employers can have serious legal and professional consequences. Our legal team is quite experienced in protecting the company's interests. So is the FBI's white-collar crime division, I replied. I'm sure they'd be very interested in those manifests. The room went dead silent. Derek's face had gone pale, and I could see Patricia frantically calculating in her head. Janet just looked confused, clearly not privy to whatever scheme I'd stumbled into. I think we're done here, I said, picking up my purse. I'll have my personal items cleared out within the hour. As I walked toward the door, Patricia called after me. Sarah, you're making a serious mistake. These kinds of accusations can destroy your career. No one will hire someone who can't be trusted to be discreet about business operations. I turned back to face her. Maybe not. But I'll still be able to look at myself in the mirror. The next 30 minutes were surreal. I packed my few personal items. A succulent plant, some family photos, a coffee mug my sister had given me, while trying to appear normal, as colleagues occasionally glanced my way. Word travels fast in offices, and I could see the curiosity and concern in their faces. Marcus Rivera, one of the junior logistics coordinators, approached my desk as I was packing. Sarah, what's going on? Derek told everyone you were transitioning to a new opportunity, but this doesn't look voluntary. I paused, holding my plant. Marcus was a good kid, fresh out of college, still believed that companies always did the right thing. How do you tell someone that their employer might be committing massive federal crimes? Marcus, if anyone ever asks you to alter shipping documents or change manifest information, don't do it, I said quietly. And if they pressure you, document everything and keep copies. He looked puzzled. Why would anyone ask me to do that? Hopefully they won't, I said. But if they do, remember what I just told you. Security escorted me out. A humiliating walk past colleagues who pretended to be busy at their desks. I could feel their eyes following me as I carried my cardboard box through the warehouse floor, past the loading docks where workers continued their shifts, unaware that their safety might be compromised by fraudulent hazmat classifications. Outside in the parking lot, I sat in my car for several minutes, letting the reality sink in. 4 years of steady employment, gone. A career in logistics that might be over before it really began. Financial uncertainty looming. All because I wouldn't help them lie to the federal government. But as I started the engine and pulled out of the Meridian parking lot for the last time, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. The weight of carrying their secret, of being complicit through silence, lifted from my shoulders. I was unemployed and scared, but I was free. At home that evening, I spread the manifest copies across my kitchen table and began documenting everything systematically. I noted patterns in the falsifications, identified which shipping routes were most affected, and cross-referenced the altered documents with federal regulations they violated. The scope was staggering. Over 3 months, someone had systematically altered hundreds of shipping manifests, representing millions of dollars in goods moving through multiple states and international borders. This wasn't a rogue employee making isolated mistakes. This was an organized effort to defraud customs agencies, evade safety regulations, and manipulate international trade documentation. I researched similar cases online and found that freight fraud operations often involved complex networks of complicit shippers, receivers, and logistics companies. The financial incentives were enormous. Companies could save thousands of dollars per shipment by underreporting weights, avoid tariffs by misrepresenting origins, and bypass expensive safety protocols by mislabeling hazardous materials. But the risks were equally enormous. Freight fraud was a federal crime carrying potential sentences of decades in prison. Customs violations could result in massive fines and permanent bans from international shipping. Safety violations that led to accidents or injuries opened companies to both criminal charges and devastating civil lawsuits. As I organized my evidence, I thought about Patricia Wells' threat that making these accusations could destroy my career. Maybe she was right. Maybe no company would want to hire someone who'd reported their previous employer to federal authorities. Maybe I'd be branded as a troublemaker, unemployable in the logistics industry. But I also thought about those dock workers handling mislabeled hazardous materials, about customs officials making decisions based on false information, about the fundamental principle that businesses shouldn't be able to commit crimes simply because it's profitable. I opened my laptop and navigated to the FBI's online tip reporting system. The form was surprisingly straightforward. Space for a detailed narrative, options to upload supporting documents, contact information for follow-up. I began typing my account of what I'd witnessed at Meridian Logistics, methodically outlining each type of violation and attaching copies of the falsified manifests. As I wrote, I realized this wasn't just about reporting Derek Holloway, or even Meridian Logistics. This was about drawing a line, about saying that some things matter more than job security or career advancement. It was about the kind of person I wanted to be when faced with a choice between complicity and consequence. I submitted the report at 11:47 p.m., along with 63 pages of supporting documentation. The confirmation screen thanked me for my submission and provided a case reference number. Within 48 hours, a special agent would review my report and determine if it warranted investigation. I closed the laptop and sat back in my chair, looking at the evidence still spread across my table. Tomorrow, I'd start job hunting, figure out how to pay my bills, deal with the practical consequences of my decision. But tonight, for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe freely. I had no idea that in less than 3 weeks, that same evidence would be the foundation for federal search warrants, or that Derek Holloway would be facing charges that could send him to prison for 20 years. I couldn't have imagined that my refusal to falsify documents would ultimately protect dozens of workers from dangerous chemical exposures, or that my testimony would help recover millions of dollars in unpaid customs duties. All I knew was that I'd made the only choice I could live with, regardless of the cost. The first sign that my FBI report had triggered something serious came exactly 18 days after my termination. I was at my kitchen table, laptop open to another disappointing job search, when my phone buzzed with a text from Marcus Rivera. "Sarah, something crazy is happening here. Federal agents just showed up with badges and boxes. They're asking about you." My heart started racing as I called him back. Marcus was whispering, clearly trying not to be overheard. "They've got the entire shipping department cordoned off. There are like 6 agents going through files. And they specifically asked if anyone knew how to contact you. Derek hasn't been seen since yesterday, and Janet from HR looks like she's about to faint." I hung up and immediately called the number on my FBI case confirmation letter. Special Agent Rodriguez answered on the second ring. "Ms. Chen, I was hoping you'd reach out. We need to meet. Can you be at our Richmond field office in 2 hours?" Walking into the FBI building felt surreal. The sterile hallways and serious-faced agents made everything feel suddenly real in a way that hadn't hit me while I was typing my report at midnight. Agent Rodriguez was a compact woman in her 40s with sharp eyes, and the kind of presence that made you want to tell the truth before she even asked questions. "Sarah, your report triggered one of the most comprehensive freight fraud investigations we've launched in Virginia," she said, leading me to a small conference room. "The evidence you provided gave us probable cause for search warrants across multiple facilities. We executed them simultaneously this morning." She opened a thick folder and spread photos across the table. Shipping containers being opened, pallets of goods being examined, agents photographing manifests and computer screens. What you stumbled onto wasn't just Meridian Logistics. This was a multi-state operation involving at least 7 companies and potentially millions of dollars in customs fraud. My mouth went dry. 7 companies. Your manifest showed patterns that matched suspicious activity we'd been tracking through customs data. Companies systematically underreporting weights to reduce shipping costs, falsifying country of origin labels to avoid tariffs, and most dangerously, misclassifying hazardous materials to bypass safety inspections. She pulled out a photograph of a shipping container being unloaded by workers in full hazmat suits. "Yesterday, we found 2,000 pounds of industrial lithium batteries labeled as, quote, General Electronics, in a container that should have required specialized handling. Those batteries were leaking toxic chemicals. The dock workers who unloaded them had no idea they needed protective equipment." The reality of what I'd uncovered hit me like a physical blow. I'd known the document falsifications were serious, but seeing workers in hazmat suits made it visceral. Those could have been my former colleagues, Marcus or any of the other dock workers I'd chatted with daily for 4 years. "Agent Rodriguez, how bad could this have gotten?" She leaned back in her chair. "Last year, a similar operation in Texas resulted in a warehouse fire when mislabeled chemicals reacted unexpectedly. 3 workers died and 17 were hospitalized. Your report may have prevented a similar tragedy." Over the next 3 hours, Agent Rodriguez walked me through the scope of their investigation. The falsified manifests I'd copied represented just a fraction of the scheme. Using my evidence as a roadmap, they'd traced similar patterns across shipping routes from Virginia to California, involving companies that appeared legitimate on the surface, but were systematically defrauding multiple federal agencies. "Derek Holloway wasn't the mastermind," she explained. "He was what we call a compliance suppressor, someone hired specifically to neutralize internal oversight and recruit employees willing to participate in fraud. When you refused, you disrupted their entire operational model for your facility." She showed me emails they'd recovered from Derek's computer, messages that made my blood run cold. "Sarah Chen is becoming a problem. She's asking too many questions about the manifest adjustments. We need to either bring her in completely or remove her from the equation." The response from someone with the email signature P. Morrison Corporate Oversight was equally chilling. "Try the promotion approach first. Financial incentives work better than threats. If that fails, terminate immediately and ensure she signs the NDA." "They were going to offer me a promotion?" I asked, stunned. "Standard practice in these operations? First, they try to buy your silence with advancement and money. If that doesn't work, they eliminate you as a threat and use legal intimidation to keep you quiet. Your refusal to sign their non-disclosure agreement probably saved this investigation. Agent Rodriguez pulled out another folder, this one containing photographs I recognized. Derek Holloway in handcuffs being led from his home at dawn, Patricia Wells being escorted from what appeared to be a corporate office building, several people I didn't recognize being arrested at various locations. We arrested 12 people this morning across 4 states. Derek and Patricia are facing federal charges, including conspiracy to defraud the United States, customs violations, and endangering workers through safety fraud. The sentences could range from 10 to 30 years. The next few weeks transformed my life in ways I couldn't have imagined. Instead of job hunting, I was consulting with federal prosecutors, helping them understand the technical aspects of shipping compliance and the significance of the document alterations. My kitchen table became a command center, where I worked with agents to decode the complex fraud schemes hidden in seemingly routine paperwork. The media attention started small. A brief article in the Richmond Times-Dispatch about a major freight fraud bust, but grew as the scope of the investigation became clear. When reporters learned that a single employee's refusal to falsify documents had triggered the entire investigation, the story took on a life of its own. Whistleblower's Courage Exposes $1 million shipping fraud ran in USA Today. CNN picked up the story for their business segment. Suddenly, I was getting calls from journalists, legal experts, and advocacy groups who wanted to discuss corporate ethics and employee protection laws. But the most meaningful call came from an unexpected source. Sarah, this is Jennifer Walsh from Pacific Logistics Solutions in Seattle. I read about your situation, and I have a proposition that might interest you. Jennifer explained that Pacific Logistics was a mid-sized shipping company that had built its reputation on transparency and regulatory compliance. We've been looking for someone to head our new Ethics and Compliance division. Your experience, both technical and moral, makes you exactly what we need. The position comes with full executive authority, a salary that I think you'll find attractive, and the backing of our board to implement whatever systems you believe are necessary. The salary she mentioned was nearly double what I'd made at Meridian. The title was Vice President of Compliance and Ethics. But what excited me most was her next statement. Sarah, we want you to build the kind of compliance program that prevents what happened at Meridian from ever happening here. You'd have complete authority to establish protocols, hire your team, and create systems that prioritize safety and legality over short-term profits. 3 days later, I was on a plane to Seattle for interviews that felt more like collaborative planning sessions. The Pacific Logistics leadership team asked detailed questions about my experience, but they also wanted to understand my philosophy on compliance, my vision for preventing fraud, and my ideas for creating corporate cultures that supported ethical decision-making. Sarah, what would you have needed at Meridian to prevent what happened? Asked CEO Michael Thompson during my final interview. 3 things, I replied. First, clear reporting channels that bypass immediate supervisors for ethical concerns. Second, protection policies that shield employees from retaliation when they report violations. Third, a corporate culture that treats compliance as a competitive advantage, not an obstacle to profitability. Done, he said. When can you start? 6 months later, I stood in front of a congressional subcommittee on transportation and infrastructure, raising my right hand to be sworn in as a witness in hearings about freight fraud and worker safety. The room was packed with reporters, industry representatives, and advocacy groups. Cameras flashed as I took my seat at the witness table. Ms. Chen, began Congresswoman Martinez, the subcommittee chair, your actions at Meridian Logistics ultimately protected countless workers from dangerous chemical exposures and helped recover millions of dollars in unpaid customs duties. In your opinion, what systemic changes are needed to prevent similar fraud in the future? I leaned toward the microphone, thinking about Marcus Rivera and all the other workers who deserved to know that their employers were telling the truth about what they were handling. Congresswoman, the most important change is protecting employees who report violations. Companies that engage in fraud depend on silence and complicity. When workers know they can report problems without losing their jobs, illegal schemes become impossible to sustain. The testimony led to new legislation strengthening whistleblower protections in the transportation industry. More immediately, It established me as a recognized expert in freight compliance and corporate ethics. Speaking invitations poured in from industry conferences, business schools, and professional associations. But the work at Pacific Logistics remained my primary focus. I'd built a compliance team of 8 people, including Marcus Rivera, who'd taken my advice to document everything and had provided crucial evidence for the federal investigation. We'd implemented automated monitoring systems that flagged unusual patterns in shipping data, created anonymous reporting channels for employees to raise concerns, and established partnerships with regulatory agencies to ensure rapid response to potential violations. The results exceeded everyone's expectations. Pacific Logistics became known industry-wide for operational transparency and regulatory excellence. Our compliance program became a model that other companies requested to study and adapt. Most importantly, we'd created a workplace where ethical behavior was rewarded and protected, not punished. 1 year after the congressional hearings, I received a letter that made everything worthwhile. It was from a dock worker in Baltimore, whose company had adopted our compliance protocols after a safety audit revealed dangerous chemical mislabeling, similar to what I'd discovered at Meridian. Ms. Chen, the letter read, I wanted you to know that our new safety reporting system caught a problem with hazardous material classification last month. Because of the protections your program provides, I was able to report it without fear of losing my job. The company corrected the issue immediately, and our safety officer said it probably prevented serious injuries or worse. I know you don't know me, but your courage to stand up for what's right protected me and my coworkers. Thank you. I kept that letter framed on my office wall, next to my congressional testimony photo and the newspaper clipping about Derek Holloway's sentencing. 18 months in federal prison, 5 years probation, and permanent disbarment from the logistics industry. During quiet moments, I sometimes thought about that Tuesday morning when Derek had handed me the envelope of falsified manifests. The choice had seemed impossible at the time, compromise my ethics or lose my job. But looking back, I realized it hadn't been a choice between 2 bad options. It had been a moment that defined who I wanted to be. The termination from Meridian had felt like the end of my career. Instead, it became the beginning of something more meaningful than I could have imagined. I discovered that standing up for principles, even when it costs everything, creates opportunities that compromise never could. My work now reached beyond any single company or incident. Through speaking engagements, consulting projects, and the compliance program at Pacific Logistics, I was helping create systems that protected workers, prevented fraud, and demonstrated that ethical business practices weren't obstacles to success. They were foundations for it. The FBI investigation had revealed that freight fraud cost American businesses and taxpayers over $30 billion annually. Our compliance model was being studied by companies across the transportation industry as a blueprint for preventing such schemes. What had started as one person's refusal to falsify documents had become a movement toward corporate accountability and worker protection. Sometimes young employees approached me after speaking engagements, asking advice about ethical dilemmas in their own workplaces. I always told them the same thing. The moment you're asked to do something that compromises your integrity, you're being given an opportunity to define who you are. Choose carefully, because that choice will shape not just your career, but the kind of person you become. My refusal to follow Derek's illegal orders had cost me a job I'd held for 4 years. But it had given me a career that mattered, work that protected people, and the knowledge that when faced with the choice between right and profitable, I'd chosen correctly. The envelope Derek handed me that Tuesday morning had contained more than falsified shipping manifests. It had contained a test of character, a moment of truth that would determine the trajectory of my life. By refusing to open it and comply, I'd opened something far more valuable, a future built on principles that no one could take away. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.